In 1971, a 21-month-old girl vanished from her Fort Worth, Texas, home silently, witnessed by no one and with not even a hint. No ransom demand, no sighting, just absent. For over half a century, her name existed in missing child files and in the unspoken prayers of a sorrowing family. The enigma stretched over generations, confounding detectives who weren't yet born when it started. And when finally the truth came out years after, everything people believed they knew about time, distance, and destiny was broken. For that little girl, the one whom the entire nation was looking for, had never really left to begin with. That summer, Fort Worth was a blue-collar town, expanding rapidly but still rooted in small-town cycles. Families struggled just to make ends meet. One such family was that of 22-year-old Alta Apentenko, a single mother struggling to care for her toddler Melissa, having left her husband, Jeffrey Highsmith. Alta worked double shifts, sometimes triple shifts, long hours as a waitress, just to have a roof over their heads. Her apartment was tiny, shared with a roommate, and childcare was a perpetual struggle. Available babysitters were few and costly. So like many single mothers of the time, Alta did what was perfectly natural. She put an ad in the local newspaper, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, searching for weekday assistance. It was just such a typical thing to do. No one would have thought that ad would be the start of one of the longest child disappearance cases in the history of America. A couple of days later, Alta received a call. The voice on the phone identified herself as Ruth. The voice on the phone identified herself as Ruth. She was one of those calm and assertive voices that immediately made strangers feel comfortable. She informed Alta that she had many years of babysitting experience, resided in a large house, and even had a fenced-in yard for kids to play securely. All seemed perfect. They planned to meet at Alta's work, but when the day arrived, Ruth never appeared. She phoned back later with an apology, saying something had arisen. She was courteous, waits patiently, and never aggressive, but consistent enough that Alta's reserve started to diminish. With her lengthy shifts adding up and no relatives in the area to assist her, Alta figured it was time to roll the dice. She hired Ruth Johnson via telephone. It made sense at the time, just a young mom doing what she had to do. She requested that her roommate turn little Melissa over to the new babysitter later that morning. A woman appeared at their apartment complex, the Spanish Gate Apartments on East Seminary Drive, at around 9 a.m. The roommate also commented subsequently that she fit Alta's description, soft-spoken, well-dressed, and calm. But something was not right. It was one of those hot Texas summer days, temperatures soaring to 104 degrees, and yet the woman dressed as if winter. Long white gloves, a scarf around her neck, a head covering that hid most of her hair and face. Her outfit was clean, even classy, but somehow formal, like she was going to church, not a day of babysitting. Nevertheless, her etiquette was impeccable. She introduced herself as Ruth Johnson, spoke graciously. Ruth Johnson spoke graciously. Believing Alta's scheme, the roommate surrendered the baby, plus a diaper bag, a bottle, and extra clothing. The entire transaction did not take more than 5 minutes. The woman thanked her and walked away from her with the infant, and that was the last anyone ever saw of Melissa Highsmith. When Alta returned home that night, she was hoping to hear the giggles of her daughter or perhaps fussing for supper. Instead, the apartment was quiet. Melissa's was quiet. Melissa's last la trompe so drilled on the door for it. Her bottle was precisely where Alta had put it. Her crib, vacant. Initially, Alta thought perhaps the sitter took Melissa to her house just down the street or out for a walk. She waited. She called neighbors. No one reported seeing anything. As the hours passed, hope gave way to fear. By 8 p.m., panic had completely set in. Alta made the phone call to the Fort Worth Police Department and reported Melissa missing. Officers came, took statements, and initiated the awful process all parents fear. First, they tried to confirm the sitter's identity, but no woman by the name of Ruth Johnson existed. No address, no work record, nothing. It was as if that name was created for that single day. The roommate's memory of the woman's unconventional attire, gloves, scarf, bonnet was the sole concrete clue. Investigators were immediately struck by the plus. The attire was not unusual anymore. It was calculated. Gloves did not leave fingerprints. The headgear covered hair color and fashion. Even the scarf concealed distinctive features. This was not merely a fashion statement. It was a disguise. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood door to door. They interviewed neighbors, store employees, and anyone who may have witnessed a woman with a child on the morning in question. No one had, however. Melissa and her enigmatic babysitter had disappeared into thin air. Police combed wherever they could imagine: bus stops, cab dispatches, hospitals, even the drainage ditches and wooded areas along the highway, and there was nothing. No baby apparel, no toys, no car sightings, as though the ground itself had swallowed little Melissa up. By the second day, the case had already become too large for Fort Worth police. The FBI took over, calling it a probable kidnapping that may have involved state-to-state transportation. Wanted posters with Melissa's photo, her shining eyes, and silky curls were printed in the thousands and posted in Texas and elsewhere. Newspaper headlines blared, "Missing Fort Worth Toddler." But as quickly as the news traveled, the investigation ground to a halt. It's important to remember, this was 1971. No CZs, no cell phones, no social media to share a photo in seconds. The mysterious woman had used only a landline, probably a public payphone. That meant no number to trace, no record to follow. Back then, detectives had to rely on what people remembered, and human memory fades faster than we'd like to admit. Police interviewed Alter repeatedly. They had to eliminate every avenue, even the unthinkable. Her recent breakup with Melissa's father, Jeffrey, raised some suspicion initially. But once interviews and alibis cleared them, both parents were absolved. There were no custody wars, no violence or neglect. Nothing to indicate the family had fabricated the disappearance. Over the next few days, Fort Worth united as close-knit groups do. Volunteers raked through parks, back alleys, and abandoned lots. Church groups prayed nightly, candles burning beneath the Texas stars. Local television news featured a shaking Alta pleading for her daughter's return. Still, no tips were received, no witnesses, no sign, and nobody appeared to know a Ruth Johnson. Weeks went by and the trail went cold. Police reports started stamping each lead as exhausted. The name Ruth Johnson became a ghost, a dead end that survived only in memory. The sight of that woman in her immaculate gloves and scarf became the face of the case. She was faceless, unflappable, and unervingly methodical. Detectives, out of the public's hearing, confessed their exasperation. With no witness, no car, and not even a proven crime scene, they had nothing to go on. The kidnap seemed almost too neat, too methodical. A woman had entered, picked up a child, and disappeared. And whoever she was, she had executed it so successfully that she had not left even a single trace. For Alta, time stood still. She left her work for a period, giving all her waking moments to searching for her daughter. She phoned detectives on a daily basis, tracked down every lead, retraced every choice she'd ever made. She lived the events over and over again in her head every night: the phone call, the gentle voice, the phrases experience, and then came the guilt. The seemingly never-ending, agonizing questions. Why had I trusted her? Why had I placed that advertisement? What else could I have done differently? Finally, the Fort Worth Police Department transferred the case to Missing Persons Division, still active but dormant. the type of file that collected dust even as hearts remained shattered. As the years went by, Melissa's photo, her little bow, and big eyes disappeared to the star of the lumper, and big eyes disappeared to the sturkmutma. Archchauster bow and biggins, obertitsduburub as and bitterbrust, erprillenbrot. That morning, however, never faded from the minds of anyone who recalled it. It was a sweltering August day. There was a polite stranger and a choice that altered everything. For the woman in the white gloves didn't just kidnap a child. She stole the answers with her. By the close of 1971, Melissa Highsmith's name had added herself to the expanding list of missing children all over America, a list that told both how susceptible families were and how sparse investigations had been in those times. Even among all those heartbreaks, though, Melissa's case was different for one chilling reason. It didn't start. It started with trust. Faith in a stranger clad too tidily for the Texas weather, a woman who vanished as suddenly as she appeared, When police initially started looking for 21-month-old Melissa Highsmith in August of 1971, they believed they'd be able to quickly locate her. In the majority of abduction scenarios, the first 48 hours are all that matter. If you're not able to develop a lead in that time frame, but for Melissa, those initial hours became days, then weeks, and eventually decades. Even with assistance from the Fort Worth police and the FBI, the case stilled from the very beginning. No ransom calls, no script tied to other kidnappings, no other physical evidence left behind. Just nothing. What characterized the Melissa Highsmith case was not the tragedy, it was the silence, the lack of leads. Investigators were sure from the outset that the kidnapping had been meticulously planned, each detail calculated. But how do you hunt someone who doesn't even appear to exist? For months, suspicion rested, unjustly but inevitably, on Melissa's mother, Alta Apentenko. It's routine in missing child investigations, but it made it no less distressing. There was never any evidence to connect her to Melissa's vanishing. Nonetheless, the interrogations, the sidelong glances, the whispered suspicions, it was all now part of her reality. Her existence was reduced to a painful cycle of interviews, waiting, and suspense. She had Melissa's photo on her nightstand, and at night, her thoughts ran the same ritual. The ad she'd put in, the pleasant voice on the phone, the instant she said yes. It was torture, whirling the same recollections, knowing they went nowhere. The FBI left Melissa's case open under the Federal Kidnapping Act, but without proof that Melissa had been abducted over state lines, they were stuck. By the mid-1970s, as the flood of new cases continued to flow in, hers slipped silently down the list of priorities. It remained active, technically speaking, but in practice it lay in a file cabinet covered in dust. Another cold case from the pre-digital days when everything was reliant on paper, memory, and chance. But for the Highsmiths, the search never abated. Alta and her former husband, Jeffrey Highsmith, forged ahead in the everyday sense of the word, new houses, new careers, but in their hearts they were still bound by the same loss. The void Melissa had left did not close up over the years or with second marriage. For the next half-century, they pursued every lead, no matter how improbable, a tip from a stranger, a rumor in another state, a face in a crowd that seemed just familiar enough to get their hearts pounding. And then, with the 1980s and 1990s, came a shift in America's awareness of missing children. The milk carton program, the missing television specials, the establishment of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children all provided families such as the Highsmiths with new tools and, perhaps more importantly, new hope. Age progression software became a potent tool. Highsmiths mailed Melissa's childhood photographs to the center, and they were given back computerized projections projections of how she would look older, first as a teenager, of look older, the first as a teenager of more older and your stolber burst of the teenager to all Melissa's childhood projections of how she would look older, first as a teenager, those images were photocopied on flyers, broadcast on local television, even included in national features. Each new picture generated a surge of tips, each one bearing a delicate glimmer of hope. An Oklahoma woman believed her neighbor resembled Melissa. A New Mexico truck driver insisted he had picked up a young woman who could have been the duplicate. The family pursued each lead, sometimes driving hundreds of miles, driven by that faint, hundreds of miles, driven by that faint, driven by that faint, by that faint, the birds of blend. And each trip ended the same way, with disappointment and another quiet drive home. They came to learn, over time, the bittersweet lesson of hope and heartbreak. Hope was their driving force, but it was also a weight, a heavy and persistent one. And when DNA analysis burst onto the scene in the 1990s, it seemed like a miracle. The Highsmiths sent in their samples whenever they could, whenever a new machine or new laboratory promised that but the databases were tiny at the time, splintered, and most private labs didn't have the equipment to cross-check effectively. Each test concluded with the same verdict: no match. Nevertheless, Alta did not use the term closure. To her, it sounded almost like defeat. And she was not willing to do that, not when Melissa could still be out there somewhere. By the end of the 1990s, the media attention had diminished for the most part. News channels would not go back and cover old stories without new evidence, and the Fort Worth Police Department was overwhelmed with over 1,000 pending cold cases. There was a time when all the missing persons files, every single one, were all placed on one detective. It was an unworkable burden. Melissa's case remained technically open, but in reality, it sat dormant. Then the internet arrived, and with it, a new type of searchlight. In the early 2000s, Melissa's brothers and sisters who'd heard stories from their parents about the sister they'd never known took the search in hand themselves. In 2000, they created a Facebook page named Finding Melissa Highsmith. It became half family scrapbook, half online detective bulletin board. They added every photo, every article, every age-progressed photo they could dig up. The page gradually attracted attention from local activists, national missing persons organizations, and even armchair detectives. Internet forums such as Web Sleuth sporadically featured the case, revisiting the same chilling facts: the 1971 kidnapping, the gloves, the scarf, the lack of witnesses. Each thread generated fresh interest, but never fresh clues. Occasionally, every few years, the tale would again come alive, typically following a case of mistaken identity or the release of another revised picture. Occasionally, women would come forward, convinced they could be Melissa. They told varying stories. Some remembered hazy memories of adoption or childhood disorientation, but they all wanted answers. For Alta, every new lead was a lifeline and a heartbreak. She'd learned over the years to read DNA reports with a steady hand, not to feel too much, but the sting never disappeared. Every time the phone rang, she once said, I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe they found her. And then it wasn't. Frustration toward the Fort Worth Police Department grew with time. Local newspapers ran op-eds questioning how such a public, emotional case could stay stagnant for so long. Activists demanded more funding for cold case units, saying what the Highsmiths were living through shouldn't have been left entirely to a grieving family's persistence. Even within the department, a few officers quietly acknowledged what no one wished to hear. One harried detective, responsible for over 1,000 cold cases, spelled it out flatly: we just can't give each one the attention it deserves. But the Highsmith family never gave up. Or Their persistence was an anecdote in itself, anecdote not only of tragedy, but of love that would not extinguish. Each birthday year, the family came together to celebrate at a small party. Always, there was cake and candles and the same words spoken out loud, "We'll bring you home." Alta never missed one. Even when the years had become decades, even when friends politely urged her to move on, she clung to the ritual. Some neighbors would notice her lighting one candle in her window every November. If asked why she still believed, she always had the same serene response: "Because I haven't seen her. And until I do, she's not gone." As the years passed, Melissa's siblings came into the mission. They had grown up with the story, living in its shadow, and over time they became the ones guiding the search. They learned how to make public records requests, how to reach out to nonprofit organizations, and how to navigate the changing landscape of DNA and genetic research. They composed letters, posted messages on online forums, and contacted missing and torn persons organizations. They mastered the techniques for preserving and passing on their family's digital legacy. They pursued every new scientific breakthrough that could one day return their sister home. But with every passing decade, realism started to take over from hope. So many of the old cases of that time never concluded with truth, only theories. Some even thought aloud that perhaps Melissa's kidnapper had long since died, taking the secret to their grave. But not the Highsmiths. They envisioned potential in something different: the growing field of DNA genealogy, a science already used to crack cold cases that had previously been impossible. Alta, older now and gentler in tone but still fierce of heart, bore her faith like armor. The years had marked her face and silvery in her hair, but her faith never faltered. When someone asked her how she could still believe after so many years, she replied softly, "Belief isn't a choice. It's how I survive. If I stop believing she's alive, then I lose her twice." In the public eye, Melissa's tale crept in and out of the news cycle. In private, the news cycle. In private, it was the unobtrusive backdrop to all family gatherings, a presence signaled in the vacant chair, the unvoiced memories, the photograph that refused to come down. And though Fort Worth did change, highways spreading, the skyline growing, the police department going high-tech, one thing remained constant: that old photograph in police headquarters. A toddler in a white dress smiling for the camera, stuck in 1971. By 2020, the case had been reopened and examined by detectives several times. They assured that what little physical evidence that existed had been thoroughly preserved, but no new tips nevertheless. By then, it was one of the longest pending child abduction cases in all of Texas. To police, it was a reminder of how much can go wrong when systems are broken. To the Highsmiths, it was something more profound, a living testament to a living testament to electrigus etruis envos, to do to lectivis latest little sound, a living testament to slay to rollersly his. A half-century had elapsed since that sweltering August morning in 1971. The world had evolved in every conceivable way: technology, policing, communication, but one chilling question remained: where is Melissa? And when the answer finally took shape, it didn't come in the form of a police report or a dusty file. It arrived from something no one in 1971 could have imagined: a solitary DNA strand uploaded to a genealogy website by a father who had never lost hope. By the early part of 2022, Melissa Highsmith's was formally one of the longest-standing unsolved cases of child abductions in America. The majority of such cases had long since dissolved into comfortable memory, but this one did not. Because the Highsmiths never gave up on it, and because the online breadcrumbs they'd left behind, the Facebook posts, the photos, the updates, kept her name active even when the world had. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children got an anonymous tip via Charleston, South Carolina. The individual said that he had witnessed a woman who appeared to be just like one of the age-progressed pictures of missing child Melissa Highsmith. The circumstances were remarkable. A woman in her early 20s, facial features matching the computer-generated image the Highsmiths had used for decades. When Fort Worth police received the information, they immediately passed it to the Highsmith family. For Alta's children, now parents and grandparents themselves, it felt different this time. "We'd heard so many things over the years," one sibling recalled later. But this one, or Bacon recalled later, but this one, or... Within days, they pooled their savings, bought plane tickets, and flew across the country to South Carolina. They carried stacks of flyers, some with Melissa's baby photos, others with the digital images showing how she might look today. Local media quickly picked up the story. Soon, headlines read, but within a week, hope met its old companion, heartbreak. DNA testing ruled the woman out. It was another dead end. The same agonized cadence they'd grown all too familiar with, hope followed by loss. But this time, something had changed. The pilgrimage to Charleston wasn't wasted. It rekindled their resolve. They realized how, after half a century, technology and social media could still inspire strangers to care, to search, to share, to hope. Back in Texas, Melissa's dad, Jeffrey Highsmith, started researching home DNA test kits, 23andMe, and he'd heard of them, naturally, but always thought the notion ridiculous. In his head, DNA was for cops, not parents. Those kinds of tests were for family histories, not crime investigations. But after Charleston, something within him awakened. Maybe, just maybe, science had surpassed faith. Then, in late October 2022, just after the Charleston lead had officially closed, a family friend, an amateur genealogist, made a suggestion that would change everything. "You've tried everything else, Jeff. Why not this?" It was simple enough. A small kit, a vial of saliva mailed to a lab where technicians would analyze the DNA and compare it against millions of profiles already in the system. The odds were slim. Almost impossible, already in the system. The odds were slim, but after 5 decades, even slim was something. On November 22, 2022, 3 weeks after sending his sample, Jeffrey opened an email from the testing company. He assumed it was a routine ancestry update. Then he saw the line that froze him in place. At first, he thought he'd misread it. The match wasn't with Melissa herself, but with 3 adults who each shared Jeffrey's DNA at a level consistent with grandchildren. He gazed at the screen, rereading the words repeatedly. Then, shaking, he called one of his daughters, the one in charge of the family's web search. Together, they scrolled through the report, cross-checked names, and slowly started comprehending what it said. If these 3 individuals were Jeffrey's grandchildren, yes, they needed to be certain. They reported to 23andMe customer support, detailing what they'd discovered and querying what they should. The firm, subject to privacy legislation, couldn't disclose individual information, but they did permit the Highsmiths to send a brief message to the account associated with the DNA profiles. While waiting, they contacted Lisa Jostila, a clinical laboratory scientist and seasoned genetic genealogist who offered to confirm the findings. Upon examining the information, she confirmed it. "There's no error," she told them. "The probability that these children are not biologically related to Jeffrey is essentially 0. Then came the news that shocked everyone. The information didn't lead to another state. It didn't lead us to some far-off country or forgotten town. It led us back to Fort Worth. "We looked all over the world," Jeffrey would say later, "and she was right here all along." Half a century of pursuing leads over borders, maps, and decades had brought them to a truth that was only a short drive away. With online records and a bit of assistance from social media, Lisa and the Highsmiths tracked the DNA trail. It pointed to a woman named Melanie Walden. Her year of birth perfectly matched Melissa's. She had 3 adult children, the very same 3 names that had appeared in Jeffrey's DNA matches. All signs pointed in where you... But the family hesitated. 51 years of disappointment and false hope had taught them well how it felt when a miracle collapses into sadness. At last, Jeffrey made a leap of faith. He opened Facebook Messenger and typed out a message that was plain, sincere, and guarded. "Hello, my name is Jeffrey Highsmith. I think I might be your biological father. I've been searching for my daughter Melissa for 51 years. When Melanie read it, she was stunned. To her, it sounded absurd. Some stranger claiming to be her father after 5 decades? It had to be a scam. She ignored it. Days went by. But curiosity got the better of her husband. He looked up Melissa Highsmith online and found the family's face online and found the famous. As he scrolled, there were old photographs, news articles, and missing person flyers dating back decades. Then one photograph brought him up short, a baby with a sweet, recognizable smile. He beckoned Melanie over and showed her. For an instant, she didn't say anything. The resemblance was impossible to deny. The same year of birth, the same city, even the same faint little birthmark under the left eye, right where hers was. It was like looking where the left eye, right where hers was. What had been a strange hoax suddenly looked plausible. Meanwhile, all over Texas, Jeffrey and his relatives were continuously refreshing their phones, hoping for a message that may never arrive. Then, one evening late, there was a notification. The discussion that followed was concise but life-altering. Melanie consented to chat. Tentatively, she also consented to undergo a DNA test. The Highsmiths managed it discreetly. No police, no reporters, no media circus. After decades of public gossip, this time was all theirs. Jeffrey later explained, "I didn't know what to think. I just knew this time felt different. This wasn't a rumor. It was real." By November 2022, late in the month, the family was getting ready to see the woman they now finally believed was Melissa. But first, before that tearful reunion, they sought one last confirmation, a professional DNA test through an accredited laboratory. It would take a few days. When Alta, now in her 70s, heard, she smiled quietly. After a lifetime of hopes raised and broken, she protected her heart wisely. "If it's truly her," she said, "I'll know when I see her." Right before Thanksgiving, the laboratory reports arrived. The DNA test verified it to be. The DNA test verified it verified. After 51 years, the infant who disappeared in 1971 had been discovered. Her new name, her history, those would remain secrets for now. But at this time, to the Highsmith family, one thing was most important. She had grown up there in Fort Worth, gone to the local schools, visited the same stores and parks as everybody else. Her life had been normal, uneventful, until that message turned everything around. Melanie did. She turned the message over to her husband, shaking her head. "People say all sorts of things online," she said. But his curiosity would not lie down. He opened the laptop once more and searched for Melissa Highsmith in the address bar. In a matter of minutes, he discovered the Finding Melissa Highsmith Facebook page, a virtual scrapbook constructed by a family that refused to give up hope. There were scans of newspapers, old TV clips, old TV clips, Isha. And then he saw it. A baby in a white frock, smiling quietly at the camera. He went numb. The similarity was unmistakable. He summoned Melanie to his side. Side by side, they held up the baby photo and her youth photos from a long-forgotten album. The eyes, the nose, even the shape of her lips, it was all identical. And then came the feature that left no room for uncertainty, the tiny birthmark under her eye, exactly in place. "That's artamir that hasily in plight. That's the and so in the corner. Put at the bubble. That's it. That's it. That's it. President, that's it. This is the Equipress Lab. And sort of to the For the first time ever, Melanie did not have anything to say. For the following morning, she at last responded to Jeffrey's message. I don't know what to think, but I saw the pictures. Maybe we should talk. Things then happened fast from that point. With assistance from Lisa Jo Sheila, the laboratory scientist who had walked the family through each DNA turn, both sides consented to a conclusive test, quietly, in secret, with no police, no media, mediums, no media police, no media. A few days after the test results arrived, a 99.999% match. Melanie Walden was indeed Melissa Suzanne Highsmith. For Alta, the experience didn't feel actual. They told me we'd found her, she said afterwards, and I just sat there. After 51 years, I didn't know how to react. The first meeting was scheduled for Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 2022, in a family member. The timing could not have been more divine or more fitting. A holiday founded on Thanksgiving and reunion would now welcome one of the longest suspended homecomings in American history. When Melanie entered that doorway, her mind still reeling, the room went still. No introductions were necessary. Alta gazed up, tears brimming, and whispered, "That's my baby." There were no speeches, no questions. Only a long, silent hug, one that appeared to span 51 years in a heartbeat. Photos from that day captured something words couldn't. 3 generations together, at last complete. 2 days later, November 26th, the family reunited again, this time in a local church. Alta and Jeffrey first publicly hugged their daughter, being watched by relatives and reporters who had known about their saga for decades. Alta's voice quivered as she exclaimed, "I thought I would never see her again." Jeffrey, characteristically reserved, merely kept repeating, 51 years. 51 years. Both joyful and overwhelming for Melissa. She'd lived a normal life under another name, never imagining her past was anything but ordinary. The story spread like wildfire. Major outlets, from the New York Times to BBC News, called it a modern miracle. Headlines read, "DNA wins." But those who knew the case best said the real victory wasn't technology, it was persistence. That DNA match never would have happened without a family that refused to quit, not for a year, not for a decade, not even for half a century. As Lisa Jo Sheila put it, this wasn't solved by less. This was solved by a father, a family, and citizen science. A man uploads his DNA and a mystery older than the internet is solved in days. In May 2023, the Fort Worth Police Department published a formal statement affirming the findings. The person identified as Melanie Walden has been identified through DNA as Melissa Suzanne Highsmith, missing in 1971. This is one of the longest successful recoveries of a missing person in Texas history. For Alta and Jeffrey, the miracle wasn't the test. It was the opportunity to begin anew. "People told me to move on," she whispered. "But how can a mother move on when she doesn't know what happened to her child?" For Jeffrey, the reunion was a lifetime quest accomplished. Every tip he followed, every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty, it was all worth it. 51 years, he said to a reporter, and a piece of DNA brought her back. For Melissa, regaining her actual name wasn't the conclusion of her tale. "I finally know who I am," she explained in a whisper of pride. Official records shut the book with 2 short words, "Subject found." Case closed. But for the Highsmiths, it wasn't closure so much as a beginning, 51 years too late. And at the center of it all was evidence that persistence and technology, faith and science can sometimes find common ground. A single database match, a single message, and a lifetime of questions had been and a lifetime of questions had been slide at the but would bring out and along with all the glorious For 51 years, Melissa Highsmith had lived just 20 minutes away from where she'd been taken. Imagine that. The same city, the same streets, the same skyline, but a completely different life. The physical distance was short, but emotionally, it was an ocean apart. As Melissa started piecing things together, pieces of her childhood gained a chilling new significance. The secrecy, the isolation, the constant rules. What she had thought was overbearing parenting now resembled a cover-up to keep something secret. Her formative years as Melanie Walden were spent in control and fright. The woman who adopted her, the same woman Melissa would come to recognize as her kidnapper, controlled virtually every part of her life. She was confined inside for days at a time, and when she protested, there was always an excuse, a fabricated one. You were born at home. You have brain damage. The outside world could hurt you. None of it was true. They were lies skillfully spun in order to keep her dependent, frightened, and alone. I used to wonder why she even kept me, Melissa confided later. If she didn't want me, I thought maybe I was just a bird. Her childhood became an emotional manipulation or conditional love cycle. Silence was the safest response. Without friends or any extended family, her world was very small. It was just the walls around her and the woman who controlled them. I thought I was born to the wrong person, she said, but I didn't know how to explain that feeling. At 15, the pressure was too much. One day, she just took off with no idea and no place to awe. Just no idea and no place to and see, with no place. And it's too, like, unusual to the bar and you can't solve for and no place, want the glides. But I knew I couldn't remain. The subsequent years were tough: shelters, streets, menial work. I just did what I had to do to survive, she explained. At 19, she already had 3 children. At 20, she'd lost them. The uncertainty that started with the kidnapping resonated through every segment of her life. It wasn't until decades afterward, following the DNA test results, that Melissa finally contacted the woman who had this woman's. They hadn't talked much over the years, but Melissa had one question that wouldn't go away: who am I? The reaction was shocking. I knew you were that baby, the woman typed, addressing the kidnapped girl from Fort Worth in 1971. Under pressure, she insisted that she paid another woman $500 in 1972 for Melissa. A private transaction, she insisted, not an abduction. Melissa didn't think so. In my heart, she said, I don't believe she purchased me. I think she kidnapped me. Before police could even interrogate her, the woman died. No papers, no witnesses, no adoption documents, only tales that did not match. Investigators were skeptical about her account as well. The attire reported in 1971, the gloves, scarf, bonnet, indicated an abduction rather than a clandestine sale. Nevertheless, that epiphany provided Melissa with something worthwhile: insight. I understand now, she explained. I know why I was isolated from everyone. If anyone had taken a close look, they'd have known I didn't fit in. Even after learning the truth, recovery was slow. The bliss of having found her true family was accompanied by sorrow and disorientation. All she remembered was the woman who had adopted her, recollections that now seemed specters in another woman's life. Her name, her past, even her sense of home, none of it had been real. It's like I lived somebody else's life, Melissa said quietly, and now I have to learn mine. Later, experts termed what she experienced identity deprivation, a state in which an individual is living in a counterfeit version of reality for so many years that it eventually becomes their reality. Psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Loftus once put it this way: a form of living amnesia, not because memories get lost, but because they were never given the chance to exist in the first place. Melissa's life fit that description perfect. Kidnapping hadn't only taken her from her family, it had taken away her very right to remember who she was. Following the reunion, Melissa took therapy and counseling to rebuild from the inside out. She also connected with her grown children who were still processing through what had happened. Everything we thought we knew about our family changed overnight, she told reporters. Then, in May 2023, in a Tarrant County, Texas courtroom, Melissa stood with her biological parents and legally assumed her birth name, Melissa Suzanne Highsmith. The courtroom erupted into applause as the judge signed the order. To Melissa, it wasn't paperwork, it was truth, long restored. That moment did not wipe away a half-century of suffering, but it was a turning point. After 51 years, she had won back her roused. Yet, beneath the relief, there was a quiet, seething rage, not only for what had happened, but for the ease with which it had passed unremarked. "I live just a few miles away," she explained. "All those years, we were that close. How is it that no one noticed?" There wasn't a simple answer. Her question demonstrated the weaknesses of 1970s-style investigations, a time when there were no databases, security cameras, or instant communication. Then a stranger might enter an apartment, abduct a child, and be gone forever. But 50 years later, that silence could be shattered by a single strand of DNA. For Melissa, that dichotomy encapsulated the bizarre paradox of her existence. Technology had finally recovered what human systems had been unable to safeguard. "DNA won," she murmured, echoing the phrase that had become a viral banner headline. "But it took 51 years to find me." The Highsmiths didn't want their narrative to conclude as merely a single amazing reunion. They wanted it to make a difference, to be a message, a mission, and a map for others who were still looking. In interviews, Jeffrey, Alta, and Melissa's siblings echoed the same mantra that had guided them for decades. Those words rang a bell far beyond their own case. Other families of missing loved ones soon started contacting them, inspired by what the Highsmiths had done. Their once secret Facebook page, Finding Melissa Highsmith, started to take on a new form, from a campaign of hope to a national resource. It became a meeting place where parents, volunteers, and genealogists could exchange tips and support. Individuals started writing from every corner of the globe, parents of lost children, adoptees looking for birth families, separated siblings by time and circumstance. They asked how to upload genetic information, how to analyze matches, how to locate professionals to assist. Wherever possible, the Highsmiths answered directly. "We can't crack every case," Melissa posted in one entry, "but we can help people grasp the tools that can." What started out as one family's loss had become something much greater, a web of love, science, and a second chance. One of the comments beneath the reunion photo captured it perfectly. "Your story gave me the courage to test my DNA. Thank you for showing us it's not too late." The media made that spirit louder. Within weeks of the reunion, the Washington Post, the New York Times, People, and CNN reported the story, all of them presenting it as a tribute to what science and unwavering persistence could do. CNN referred to it as a triumph of the owl. The New York Times acknowledged it was one of the longest missing child cases ever solved through consumer genetics. And for all to read, it was a reminder, sometimes hope doesn't disappear, it just awaits the technology that will catch up. For the Washington Post, Melissa Highsmith's story was bigger than a front-page headline. It was a Thanksgiving miracle fueled by data. DNA wins, once simply an optimistic statement from the Highsmiths, had now become an emblem, a shorthand for the breakthrough miracles achieved through genetic reunification. But with celebration came introspection. Commentators were left pondering a hard question: how could something that had stumped the police for half a century be cracked with regular tools, determination, and some digital detective work? That debate morphed into a national discussion regarding the place of private DNA testing in public investigations. Privacy groups, legislatures, and police weighed in, looking for a balance between individual rights and long-delayed justice. Meanwhile, the Highsmiths stayed grounded. They didn't see themselves as heroes, just as helpers. They continued to share guidance, connect families, and offer emotional support wherever they could. Melissa, now in her 50s, started speaking at community gatherings and online forums about identity, healing, and rediscovery. Her talks were never dramatic, just honest. "I lost 51 years," she'd tell them. "That time does not come back. But if my story can help even one person locate their family, then it's worth it." It became part of America's collective memory in 2022, a Thanksgiving story about hope emerging at a time when many needed it most. Podcasts, documentaries, and news specials revisited the case, not as a tragedy, but as a testament of resilience and the quiet revolution of citizen science. Even the academy and police communities were attentive. At a 2023 conference on forensic science, officials credited the Highsmith case as a breakthrough, evidence that open DNA databases could coexist with conventional investigative techniques. Before long, police agencies were piloting new training programs instructing officers in the use of genetic searching and contacting relatives in their cold case investigations. The ripple effect widened even more. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children started collaborating with private DNA testing centers, citing the Highsmith recovery as a turning point. "It changed how we think about old cases," said one official. "Families aren't just waiting anymore, they're investigating." For the Highsmiths, this was not just advocacy, it was legacy. What they had proved through their journey was that technology and faith did not have to be divergent. That miracles could be believed in without contradicting a belief in science. Their daughter's recovery had been a scientific victory as well as a spiritual solution. By the close of 2023, the Finding Melissa Highsmith Network had reached out to over 30 families looking for missing loved ones through DNA. Some established partial matches, others were reunited altogether. Every success had the same implicit message the Highsmiths had lived. In retrospect, Jeffrey summarized, "For 51 years, we were searching in the wrong places," he said. "Now we inform people, look everywhere, but don't overlook to look close." Alta, who is in her 70s now, opted for quiet instead of headlines. She spent her days with the family she feared she'd never see again. But when pressed on what message she hoped people would take from their tale, she replied softly and patiently, "Don't stop believing, and don't wait for someone else to find them. You can be the one." For many all over the nation, Melissa Highsmith's story is still both a miracle and a mirror, a reminder that the solution to life's longest enigmas may not be luck or distance, but in the simple act of never giving up. So if you think that second chances in science and in tales proving what's lost is found, subscribe, comment, and stick with us. Because sometimes the next miracle begins with a story just like this one.